James Schramko here, and this is episode 1120 of my podcast at jamesschramko.com. Today I'm joined by a friend and sales expert, John Blake. Now, if sales feels like it's gotten harder for you lately, or if you're getting ghosted, or deals stall out, or it's just not converting like it used to, this episode's for you. We're going to be covering what's changed, especially since I was in sales, which was quite some time ago, what still works and what you'd be wanting to do differently in 2025 and beyond. So welcome, John. It's great to have you here.
Thanks, James. Good to be here.
We've been online friends for ages. We've become surfing buddies. We went on a Maldives trip. We catch up regularly in the mentor group, and we both have a love of sales and some ancient history on it by the sound of it.
Yeah.
When did you first get into selling?
When I was 17, I was riding for Rip Curl and Quicksilver. So I used to surf in all of the contests, and the guy that sponsored me rang my parents because I was still 17 and asked them if they thought that I'd be interested in coming and working for him. And at the age of 17, I didn't even really know what sales was. I had friends that were at university, and I'd talk to them and I'd say, "What are you doing at uni?" And they'd say, "Oh, I'm doing a marketing degree." And in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking, "What's that?" You didn't want to appear stupid, and to ask them. And it wasn't until I'd actually been doing that, sales and marketing for probably 3 or 4 years that I actually realized that I was actually doing in practice what they were studying in theory. So I worked there, and they were amazing. We were showroom selling. I was selling Ocean and Earth. I was selling Rip Curl. I was selling Quicksilver. They had a whole bunch of other brands, and that was almost like I think it was a small business apprenticeship. They taught me how to balance books. They taught me how to sell. They taught me how to make appointments. They taught me how to ring clients and get them to buy more if they sent their order in and it wasn't enough. The guy that I worked for was amazing like that. Like, he'd hear him in his office because my office was next to his, and he'd go, "Oh yeah, look, I've just received your order, and quite frankly, I'm a little bit disappointed."
Or did he could have said, I've received the first part of your order, but there seems to be a page missing.
Yeah. And he would ring everyone and he'd get them to buy more. He'd go, get them to buy at least another couple of packs of shorts. I mean, Quicksilver, at that point was going mental, it was just, surfwear in general was going through the roof. So it really didn't matter if they bought more, they were going to sell it. He was a master at that.
Really were different times. When I think about my early sales connection, one of them's actually related to West Australia, which is where you're from.
Yeah.
Or residing in now, at least. And I was sailing at a competition, and it was the Australian titles for 16-foot skiffs, and I was the fourth hand back when they had 4 people, and I was about 12. And they put me on a red-eye special flight back from West Australia to Sydney, and I was at the airport bookstore, and there was almost nothing to buy, no magazines. And there was this book by Tom Hopkins, it was How to Master the Art of Selling. And I bought that. And I read it on the plane because I was kind of bored. I was 12 and we didn't have iPads back then. I didn't know what selling was. I absorbed some of the language in it and incorporated it into life without really knowing it. But it really came back out when I was about 18 and 19. I was working for my grandfather, who was a timber broker. And very much like your mentor there, he was on the phones. He was saying magic words that could have people ordering big bulk orders of timber, ordering extra things they forgot to put on the order or they didn't know they needed that they'll be stuck if they don't have. And he was a product expert. He knew where to find and source the stuff, and he got just a 3% commission. And I remember at the time thinking, that is so small. And it's with great irony that these days a large chunk of my income comes from a percentage royalty, helping people with their business. So it's funny how history repeats. And just to date this is around about 1989, 1990. And then I went to debt collection. And that's kind of selling, except they already have the product or service. So you have to get the money, which you got a lot less leverage in that case. And by the time I did end up in sales, it turned out I was quite good at it. I knew we had this podcast coming up. I just shook out my drawers and I found these old certificates. I got a certificate of membership here to certify that I was a Mercedes-Benz of Sydney and I'd attained the highest level of sales professionalism, which qualified me as a 1998 member of the Mercedes-Benz Passenger Car Sales Guild. Because in 97 was my first year at Mercedes-Benz. I'd already come first at BMW from 95, 96. 97, I think I came fourth or fifth. And then in 98, that year, I came first. And it's my 99 membership to the same guild. And then I got promoted to sales manager. Mm-hmm. And I won the sales manager award a couple of times. Now, I say that just to give some baseline credentials to my own side of the equation. When it comes to the selling topic, I'm pretty deep on it. But I am curious because you're a current practitioner. You still teach selling every day to people in the trenches, and that's what I want to bring to this episode. I want to know what shifted that has changed. Clearly from when I was selling, we started getting Palm Pilots starting to come through, and I was still on a paper follow-up system. I can only imagine with messaging, with the platforms that the people have, different channels they can use. It's gone a long way from just sending out letters or doing phone calls or face-to-face. And there must have been some changes. So, what changes have you seen in more recent times than than back in the day, us dinosaurs?
Yeah. Well, I think the story that illustrates this the best is one of my clients is that they're the biggest manufacturer of fiberglass pools in the Southern Hemisphere. And they've got 4 or 5 different brands. They ship pools all around the world. And I've done a bunch of work with them and their display, because they've still got displays in Perth. And when I first started working with them, it was probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and they still had some reps that had been with the company for 50 years. It's one of those small, lovely family businesses, and these guys were still their reps. And the contrast and the thing that I think illustrates perfectly what we're talking about is that 50 years ago, if you wanted to buy a pool, what you did, there was really only one path to buy a pool, right? You got in the car, you drove to a display, you got out of the car, you walked into the display, you looked at some pools, you spoke to one of the salespeople that worked at the display, and you bought a pool.
Yep.
And that's it, right? So now fast forward 50 years, because a lot of these guys still there, 50 years down the track. And so if you're a consumer and you want to buy a pool, what are you going to do now? Well, you're going to have a look at their Facebook page to see what people are saying about them. You're going to read some reviews. You might go to one of those aggregated lead gen websites where you put your details in and download a free report that tells you the 4 biggest mistakes that people make when they buy a pool. You're going to talk to at least 4 different vendors. You're probably going to try not to talk to anyone. You're just probably going to try and get a price.
That's a critical point, isn't it? There's consumers have built a resistance to wanting to speak to a salesperson because people don't like to be sold, but they love to buy.
No. Yeah. So, so these guys are, in this sort of world of bewilderment. And so my first exposure to them was to, and I've done a similar thing with display home building people where it's like, okay, so you receive a lead. It's not the same as that guy walking into a display. He hasn't got the same amount of motivation. He hasn't got the same amount of qualification. In actual fact, on a scale of 1 to 10, in terms of his motivation to buy from you, he's probably a 1 or a 2. But salespeople still reply or still respond with a level of energy that would assume that that person's an 8 or a 9 out of 10. And so there's a couple of different ways to deal with that, but the short way to deal with that is we've got to do this dance because the salesperson's responding at, or in most cases responding at the level of an 8 or a 9 in
Yeah.
terms of what they believe that the person is qualified, but the actual inquirer is only at a 1 or a 2. So we've got to actually start the communication at their level of interest and then slowly build them up to a point where they're actually happy to jump on a telephone call with somebody or make an appointment. And that's one of the biggest shifts. Like that's, and companies are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, especially big companies. Like one of my clients does water tanks and they're spending, 6 figures a month on lead gen. And if those leads aren't handled properly, it's the difference, and we've tracked the numbers. It's literally the difference between connecting to 30% of the leads that are generated with that ad spend, as opposed to connecting with 80 or 70 or 80% of those leads. And it really comes down to the speed at which you respond, and then the messaging, and I call it the volley effect. It's like we need to create a volley of communication that warms that person up to a point where they're actually ready to have a conversation, which when you try and explain that to someone that was in sales 50 years ago, they look at you like you're eating spiders. But that's the game. And that's one of the massive changes.
It's an interesting take. Well, when I was selling, we used to treat phone inquiries with a much higher urgency and priority because that person could sit there and dial up 5 dealers within the space of half an hour.
Yep.
So we had a 1 in 5 chance. Whereas if someone's in the showroom, they're somewhat captive. It's a much slower process to drive from showroom to showroom. Like most people get exhausted after 2 or 3 visits. So you're like a 1 in 3 chance. And so we knew we could tip the market share odds in our favor by prioritizing phone-ins because those people they're dialing around. And this is where I'm a little bit confused, I suppose, because often the person calling is very close to the buying window. So I wonder if you're talking about which phase of the buying cycle someone is at, whether they're just in the sort of early phases of finding out they've just discovered, the kids keep nagging them for a pool, and now they're just finding out like how does buying a pool work? What types of pools, what size, how much do they cost? That's the early phase. The next phase is they've got a pretty good idea and they've been sitting on it. It's like it's been another heat wave, and they're like the wife's saying, "You get me a pool, or we're moving right to the ocean or whatever." And now they're in like the red hot zone. The temperature's right up, and they're ready to buy. And now they're just calling around to find out which supplier they're going to place their whatever tens of thousands of dollars, I imagine, order. So are we talking about what stage of the marketing cycle we're at, or are we talking about increasing our market share odds by serving the channels other than walk-ins?
Well, the data that I guess most people are familiar with is that 80% of purchases have some sort of an online research component prior to contact.
Yep.
And so when I talk to clients and I say, okay, where do your leads come from? Most of them will tell me that 70 to 80% of their leads are web-based because that's the type of marketing that they're doing. Most people are spending the lion's share of their advertising on Facebook or Google. So most of those inquiries are coming through the internet, and then probably 20 to 30% of those people are actually calling or they're rocking up. So you can delineate the two different approaches by looking at the fact that, I reckon, I've been coaching and consulting now for 21 years. I reckon it's growing. So there's probably 70 to 80% would be some sort of a web form, email based inquiry, and then you've got
for sure. So I mean, it's so leveraged and easy to reach people, but it's also much more watered down than an in-person or phone call, right? So the pre-marketing side's critical. I also, I don't know if this is true or if on the same side, but I think it would be a huge mistake for a company like a pool company not to be using other marketing modalities, like especially direct response letters, because it's such a high open rate when you send a letter to someone's letterbox in 2025. As a very strong channel, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely.
So
you can fire a shotgun down the direct mail post highway, and you're not going to hit anyone.
and imagine a lot of these companies are not doing the greatest job they can of collecting reviews from every client, of maintaining good social media accounts that would fortify someone in the research phase. And it's clear, like you mentioned before, those aggregator sites that catch people looking for stuff and sell off the leads, they're just way better at marketing than the people who have the products to sell. But some of these companies could actually improve their marketing and take that in-house and be a sales powerhouse, right?
Definitely.
Is the vast majority of what you're helping people with when they have actual sales people?
Yes.
Yep, great. It's good to know that. And do you feel like that market is still as solid as ever?
The market for having a team of salespeople?
Yes.
In most cases, they're not big numbers of people. So anyone that's got, let's say, up to 50 or 60 employees might only have between 2 and 5 salespeople. And sometimes those 2 to 5 salespeople will include the owner. And there are probably some of those use cases where you could replace the salespeople. You could potentially test having less salespeople, and you could potentially get a similar or slightly similar result. A lot of those people are probably stuck in that paradigm.
Well, I think you've perfectly described it. A lot of the people who would be listening to this podcast, either a small agency or an info product marketer who might have masterminds or whatever, and may very well the salesperson would be the business owner. And a lot of people are scared of selling or have avoided doing it. So they've either created strong marketing or they're just missing out. And there's elements to sales where it doesn't just have to be that prospect who's ready to buy your product today. It could be that you're selling the idea of a strategic alliance with a big supply partner. It could be that you're pitching a family member on being able to go to a conference or something. Like, it's good to learn these skills and to have confidence around them. And I'd like to make sure we cover some of that. But let's just recap where we're at so far. So far, what you're telling me, as there's more communication channels and more access to the consumer from all the competitors, it's good to be fast and to get into that volley engagement. You said back and forth as a human. Would you say it's more important to be a human than having some little automated chat bot on your website?
Yes. And the reason why is because most people will inquire through the web and assume that the response that they're getting is from a bot.
Yep.
And it's not until you go backwards and forwards that they realize, oh, wow, I'm actually talking to a real human here. So most people will be quite curt, perhaps a little bit rude to start off with. They'll be like, I want a price on, give me a price on X. And then when you respond and say, hey, I just got your inquiry. I noticed that, this, can you tell me, have you done this or have you done that? And then suddenly they're like, oh, wow, there's actually a person on the other end of this. Then they kind of loosen up. And we talk about the love letter. I think it might have even been Dean Jackson that talks about this, where when you do the 9-word email and someone responds with a yes, and then you ask another question, they tend to then respond either that time or the time after with like a paragraph, 2 or 3 paragraphs of information, and they sort of give you their life story. I think Dean Jackson calls that the love letter. And it's the same, with a new lead inquiry, it's the exact same effect. And, there's one in particular that I remember. I was actually, believe it or not, I was standing in front of a team of salespeople, and we were talking about maximizing the number of leads that they could make appointments with, go and see them. They're a curtain, window treatments, blinds and curtains manufacturer and installation business. And while I was standing in front of the room, an inquiry comes in. It's like, can you please send me a quote on blinds? I've enclosed plans. Thank you. Really quite curt. And I said, what would you normally do with this? And they said, oh, we would send them quote. And I said, what would typically happen then? And they go, nothing. I said, would you follow up? And they go, yeah. And I go, how many times? Oh, 2 or 3 times. What? You never hear anything back. Totally ghost you. Yep. I went, okay, give me your phone. So they gave me the phone. I just wrote back and said, have you built before? Or is this your first time? Send. And the guy, the owner, is like, oh yeah, that's the end of that. We're not going to hear anything. That's that lead gone. Within 30 seconds, ping. There's a response, and I've written back and I've gone, thanks so much for your response. Can I ask, who are you building with? And this is because I'm literally standing in front trying to run a training session, whilst also trying to wordsmith replies to this inquiry. And they've written back and they've gone, and they've said the name of the company, and they've gone, it's on the plans, because the name of the building company was on the plans. And so I had to somehow get past that. But then she said that they wanted shears, which are the most expensive curtains that you can buy. And so I've written back and I said, are you aware that shears are the most expensive window treatments that you can buy? Turns out it was a first home buyer, and they wanted that they were only getting window treatments in every room because it was a bank requirement to have them lend the money. But we only found that out after the 3rd reply.
Mm-hmm.
And they ended up becoming a client and getting a house full of Venetians, because they're the cheapest window treatments that you can get. But it's a classic example of the way that they would have dealt with that lead is they would have just sent them a quote, and then they would have ghosted them, because it would have been, I need to get 3 quotes. I'm just going to go with the cheapest, and So yeah, the getting back to people quickly and the volley thing is so important.
It sounds like when you're communicating with that prospect, you actually cared about their outcomes and their solution. It sort of leads well into the question I wanted to ask you about the languaging. I've observed some trends. There's an entire industry of baller bro marketers with their clever little words, and it's the same shit over and over again. Like, even if I follow someone's Instagram account, I'll get a DM. Hey, thanks for the follow. Are you here for the content, or are you looking to, insert result that they supply? It's like, it's so slick and oily and insincere. And then this whole industry spawned like bro language, and they actually use the word bro. That's why I'm saying it. But they say, hey, bro. And I know I'm talking to someone who's probably 18 or 19, and it's generational perhaps, but it doesn't sit with me. And like, they don't really know their prospect, and they definitely don't care about my outcomes. They're looking for some dollar bills to put in their dollar bill gun to fly off in the next TikTok reel in front of a rented Ferrari. You can tell. How is the language happening in the marketplace? Can we finally say goodbye to all the old pressure closing stuff, or is it still work?
Well, I think you can reach the same outcome, but you need to be more elegant about it, because so many more people are educated as to what a sales process is. They have an awareness of when they're being sold to.
Because there's just stinky words that red flag, the barriers go up as soon as you hear the same barrier words like,
Yeah.
if I could, would you? Those sort of things.
All that. And even just, I mean, there's a particular resource that I have called the Dirty Dozen, which are 12 words that you should avoid in all of your sales conversations. Happy to make that available to anyone.
Is it words like contract?
Yes.
Yeah. Instead, what do we use? Agreement?
Yeah.
Yep.
Or there's or plan or
I mean, other classics like don't tell people they're in a negotiation.
No.
Like I used to feel like the best sales are invisible. I don't know whose quote that is, but it always resonated with me.
That's my entire philosophy. It should never feel like to the person that they're in a process. As soon as that happens, you get instant resistance and pushback.
Agree on it, and I went to great lengths to be counter the sales norm, but it certainly worked well for me. I'm living proof that you can sell without being salesy. And I'm actually not. It's weird. I've got a podcast, but I'm not an expressive, outgoing, talky talk person. I'm more of an analytical pragmatist. I'm more quiet. I think more than I speak, and I genuinely care about helping someone be better off. That's the premise, my whole premise for selling. How can I improve their situation? Because if that can happen, then that's good for both of us. So you'd say the top performers are more elegant with their language. Do you think they have a longer lifespan than the bro marketers?
Absolutely. And there's one thing that I wanted to make sure I brought up is that there are people out there that will tell you that they can achieve an 80 or a 90% close rate. And what they fail to mention is context. So if somebody that you're talking to has been on your list for 5 years, they've watched, they've downloaded 3 of your sales resources reports, they've sat through 4 webinars, they've downloaded your free book, and have been engaging with your content for a long
And you've
period.
told them the price before they get on a call, all that stuff.
You've done the triage thing and disqualified a whole bunch of people, but you failed to mention that. It makes it sound like somebody who didn't know you from a bar of soap jumps on a call with you, and for every 10 of those people, 8 or 9 are buying, and it's just not accurate.
Look, I could go to the local truck stop between my place and the airport where there's a McDonald's cafe, and I reckon the server there has a 99% close rate. Right? Because there's been a lot of pre-marketing gone into that McCafe.
Yep.
There's an established need. They've got a captive audience, massive branding. All that person has to do. In fact, they've even got kiosks, right? So the only person they're talking to is someone who doesn't know how to operate a kiosk at this point. So they have a pretty needy customer. So yeah, I think closing rate is a misleading thing because it does definitely require context as to who you're talking to. What about another sort of related topic here? And this is something that I feel is pretty light on. Let's talk about where salespeople cut corners. Where do you see them cut the corners the most? If the idea of this question is someone listening to this is interested in having a crack at selling or getting better at it, what should they do that most people don't do?
Well, the biggest tell is that if you are talking about your product with a potential client in your discovery conversation within the first 10 minutes, your process is broken. And I listen to hundreds and hundreds of sales calls. That's one of the key things that I do to coach people is we will build the process, we will teach them the process, and then we will listen to them hopefully using the process with their prospective clients, and we'll give them feedback on it. And one of the biggest ways that salespeople shoot themselves in the foot is that they talk about product too early. And literally at minute number 2 or minute number 3, and you can hear them, they're just itching to launch into, well, what we do is, well, let me just tell you about a little bit about our company before we go any further. And then you can just, it's like, they just kill the sale instantly.
We had a name for that. It was called product dumping.
Yeah, or premature elaboration.
Oh, I love that. Well, I mean, when you're selling in the case of the car, we were selling a very tangible physical product, and you get an enormous amount of product training from the manufacturer. It's very easy to get into thinking that telling is selling, but I'd say asking is selling, more like it. Even the framework that I used and loved, spin selling, the N is what the customer needs, that's fourth down the back of the bus. Like there's three parts that have to come before that in that framework, and that is the situation, like the lay of the land, the problems that they're having, and then the implications that causes. And after you understand all of that, then comes in the solution recommendation. So I really concur with you on that. If you're talking about the product straight away, you'd have to have a very, contextually, you'd have to have a really qualified customer who's already declared all of that in advance.
Well, in most cases, if someone buys at that point, they're buying in spite of your sales process.
Correct. You're an order taker, not a sales professional.
Correct. Order taker.
Order taker. And order takers are highly at risk of not being around. Like the McDonald's server, to a large extent, is an order taker. They're there to get the order and deliver it from the people who don't use the electronic kiosk or the app. I've noticed the app is now taken over from the kiosk. I don't know if you've experienced this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's fascinating how much, in fact, I'll tell you a story. I just went to the post office before this call. We got a new iPhone in the house, and we're trading in the old one back to Apple. Turns out they're offering probably what I'd get on Marketplace, and I don't want weirdos coming around to my house for a phone. So when you trade the phone in now, you just go to the post office with the trade-in phone, and you don't need packaging or anything. You just lob there with the phone, and you show them a QR code. The lady at the post office today scanned the QR code, and she goes, okay. Because she says, how are you going to send this? And I said, they just said, show you this. She scanned it, and then she goes off. She got some bubble wrap and a box, put the phone in the bubble wrap, put the bubble wrap in the box, and then she hit print, and the label printed off back to head office, a label printed off for some declaration, and then all I had to do is sign it. Didn't have to pay anything, didn't have to do anything. It's like that lady just followed the instructions, but it's really, there's a lot of corners, steps being cut from the process. And I imagine that person won't be required at some point in the future. So what I used to observe is that people wouldn't spend enough time understanding the situation to be able to make the appropriate recommendation. And the classic example, I refer to this, and I think it's in my book, Work Less, Make More, available on Amazon, is the salespeople who run around with their spreadsheet of the commission. And whoever came into the showroom, they'd try and stick that car into them, the one that paid them the $1,000 or $2,000 bonus, regardless of what the customer needed. And to me, I found that highly reprehensible. Like that's just disgusting behavior. Yeah, like zero regard for the customer. And I used to look for the second and the third sale by making sure I put that customer in a position where they could actually talk to me in the future and get a good situation the first time around.
Yeah, it's how long do you want to be doing this? If you really don't have your clients' best interests at heart, because people talk about manipulation, sales. It's the intent piece. It's like, what is your intent? What is your motivation? Are you looking to help this person, or are you just looking to sell them something that you get permission on? And that's why I believe the most dangerous people in the entire world are people that actually believe that their intention is noble when it's clearly not. They're the most dangerous people. They're the sociopaths out there.
They're in every industry, but some industries are more public than others. They're in banking and finance and politics and everywhere else. It's just that In B2B markets, we don't see them sometimes. In B2C markets, the real estate agents, the car salespeople, the financiers, like the financial planners, those people get caught more often because there's more public scrutiny. So it sounds like listening is just a simple core that is still disregarded.
Mm. Yeah, it's bizarre. And the other thing that I've found is that unless, because I've got, clients that I've coached for a long period of time, unless you're continually revisiting that process, it's that the intuitive thing is for them to just drift back into, well, what we do is, within the first 3 or 4 minutes, and it's like, what are you doing? It's like we talk about making it like the term for it is making a blind offer.
Gotcha.
Is like you're making a recommendation to somebody and you're not clear on what their problem is. You're not clear on whether they actually want to solve that problem. You're not clear on whether the outcome that will be achieved from solving that problem is something that is of any motivation to them whatsoever. Yet you still go ahead and make an offer or a pitch to that person and wonder why, only 1 or 2 people out of every 10 people that you do that with buy.
I love that. I mean, I believe you should only show the right offer to the person's problem at the appropriate point that it becomes relevant. Because if you don't establish the groundwork, definitely, I love that. The blind offer is exactly what it is, isn't it? It's a very weak way to sell. And the weakest salespeople use things like discounts as a crutch. They just wave price out there before they worry about establishing any need. It's easy to experience that in retail. Sometimes you go into retail and the retail person will volunteer a huge discount for you without asking any questions. Like you walk into a shop and they go, oh, that rack over there is all 50% off. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's like you already got to price within seconds. It's hopeless for the owner of that business.
Terrible.
They're relying on the last resort. And I was taught that a discount is akin to a financial apology for not having a good enough product or service.
Wow. Yeah, I like that.
And I feel like if you get the groundwork right, then you don't need to learn 27 tricky closes or special word tracks because it takes care of itself. Now, I accept that if you're a cold outreach person, you will need some tricky word tracks. Like, would you reward me if I were to tell you this is a cold call straight out of the gate? That sort of stuff. You have to have tricky words if you're doing cold outreach. But I hope that I never have to be in a situation where cold outreach is part of what I do. I like the pre-marketing thing instead. So moving to the next sort of topic is follow-up frequency. We've talked about timeliness. It's good to be quick. And by the way, I know people who do more than $10 million a year with an education product. And as soon as someone opts in for a webinar, they call them that second. Like they are on the phone watching the forms come in and they call immediately. That's who you're up against in the industry, that level of speediness. But what about persistence or longevity of follow-up?
Well, most people think that the long game of follow-up is 90 days. And I learnt this from Dean Jackson and then have since gone and effectively proven it in dozens and dozens of different industries. But the data that I learnt from Dean is that only 15 to 20% of people are going to buy within the first 90 days of their initial inquiry, but a further 30 to 35% of people are going to buy between the 90-day mark and the 2-year mark. And like I said, I've proven that time and time again, and I've got a resource that I share with people, and they use it exactly word for word. It's got the scripts in terms of what to say when you call. It's got the exact word for word templates in terms of when to email over a 90 to 120 day period, and then what to do between 120 days and that 2-year mark. Because there is so much lost business because most salespeople will give up after one or two follow-ups. In fact, I do a diagnostic before with every salesperson that I have in my programs, and the average number that they tell you that they follow up, which may or may not be accurate, but the average number of times that they tell you that they follow up before they give up is 2.
And why do you think people don't follow up?
Because there's a bunch of different reasons, but I think probably the 2 biggest ones is that they don't want to be rejected. They don't want to feel like they're being pushy. And in most cases, it's because they got 4 new leads today, which means that they're probably just going to talk to the ones that just came in because they think that the ones that they've already presented an offer to are lower value. But in my experience, there's just so much business that you can do just through optimizing the people that you've spoken to that haven't bought yet.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And the common concern that I see when I'm dealing with people is they don't get enough deal flow. So they really shouldn't be giving up after 1 or 2 things. I agree people will probably have call reluctance. They don't want to be rejected or have someone say no. Ways to overcome that. I look at each time you get a no, you're getting one step closer to a yes, just on a casino odds scenario. Like every time you get red, you're going to be getting closer to a black at some point on the roulette wheel.
Yeah.
So it's worth pushing through to get to that yes quickly.
I would say the number one thing, because I'm literally at this point coaching dozens of different salespeople, I would say the number one thing that all of them have in common that they could do better is just more reps.
Yeah.
It's like and I say to people, if you dial 20 numbers, and 20 numbers could consist of the new leads that came in today, a whole bunch of follow-ups that haven't bought yet, and potentially some past clients that you could call and make a new offer to. But if you dial 20 numbers in 1 hour, you will talk to between 4 and 7 people. And of those 4 to 7 conversations, you'll probably end up making potentially 2 to 3 offers. And of those 2 to 3 offers, if you've got a good process, you'll probably convert 1 to 2 sales. Yet no one wants to do it. No one wants to pick. And like I literally I had a coaching call with one of my clients the other day, and I said, we've got 10 minutes left. Give me a list of people to call. And I rang 10 numbers in 10 minutes, and I spoke to 8 people. And I said, you guys aren't even doing half of that.
That's like most salespeople train less than an under 10 netball team.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. When I was in debt collection, one of my first role was a TCR, which is a telephone collections rep, which means I sat at a desk. I had 2 telephones and, desk phones back in the day. And I would call people all day long asking for money for things they'd already purchased. And I could get through 170 calls in my shift.
Wow.
Every day.
Not even using an auto dialer.
No, just you'd put your notes in the computer, hit return, the next profile, and I'd call.
You probably would have had a higher connection rate than 7 out of every 20.
People
also, you probably would have
generally
had
when they owe money, they don't necessarily want to answer the call.
Okay, so maybe the same.
But I got crafty at leaving the right messages, and I also figured out some stuff. So I took it across to when I ended up in the car sales role. I realized that most of my demographic, the first job was at BMW, those 45 to 50-year-old men are usually business owners or high-level professionals, and they stay in the office after the secretary leaves. So I would call up early and late, before the secretary came in and after. So after 5:30, I'm calling. Guess who picks up the phone? The person I want to talk to, because there's no one left in the office. They're the one grinding it out, and that's my prospect. So I learned when to call people to get an answer. I learned how to leave curiosity-based messages to have people call me back. Especially, I got a lot of voicemails. That was really the technology back then. We did have SMS, but it wasn't a big thing. But the voicemail is where I could have someone be calling me back urgently.
Yep.
Like I could say, John, it's James here from such and such. I just got a email from my boss with an announcement of a new price change for the model that we were speaking about last week. And it'll be great if you could give me a call between now and tomorrow afternoon if we want to get in before the cutoff expires. And so like they would definitely call back, like often as I'm hanging up, they're listening, screening calls. So I got crafty with the timing, but I agree with you in the follow-up. And the other thing that I did, the system that I did to avoid expert error, which is skipping steps, like the product dumpers, is I printed out a write-up sheet that had 6 questions on it that I had to ask every single person religiously, like cannot skip a step, especially the important ones that are the gotchas, like who is this vehicle for and when do you need the vehicle and which features are most important for you with this, and if they have a trade-in, have they already driven the vehicle before? Those sort of questions were critical because if you got a bad answer for some of them, it will drastically change what you're going to recommend to them. Especially if they're just joined an MLM network and they're going to be buying this car in 3 years when they're a high achiever, then they're going to go into a different pile than the company director who just got a pay rise and needs a car by next week. And of course, the classic car sales one where the car is actually not for the person you're talking to. It's for their wife or whatever, and they're not even at the table. You need to get them involved. I'd say, listen, how about I'll hop in that model, I'll drive over tomorrow afternoon and we can go and pick the kids up from school in it and check it out over the speed humps and make sure that your wife's really comfortable driving into the garage and stuff. And he's like, could you do that? And I'm like, absolutely. Like nobody else is doing that.
Nah.
So
no, I don't imagine they would.
I imagine tech is definitely complicating things. Like you've now got tools and CRMs and AIs and messages, and so we've gone beyond just phone calls and text and letters. We've got people will be on LinkedIn, they've got Facebook. You could message. How do people even follow up? Is there too much going on?
Well, there's similar to the whole inquiry piece. There's what I call contact fragmentation, and that is where if you look at all of the messaging platforms now, so if someone inquired on Facebook, maybe you need to engage with them in that on that platform, but maybe they inquired on Facebook and they gave you their email address, and then you have to use that email address, but maybe you should also be engaging with them on the platform that they inquired on. If it's a B2B type process, some people won't respond to an email even if they inquired using that email, and then you connect with them on LinkedIn and send them a direct message on LinkedIn and they respond within 5 seconds. So it's about using multiple media, and in the follow-up piece it's like alternate email with text. And I'll say something, they ghosted me. It's like, well, connect with them on LinkedIn and send them a message on LinkedIn and see how you go. And 9 times out of 10 they'll he responded. He accepted my connection request and he responded. It's like, okay, great. You know what I mean? So it's you've got to try and mix up the media to increase the likelihood of you being able to connect with people so that you can follow up with them. Because it's just become, when there's WhatsApp, there's text messages, there's email, there's Facebook Messenger platform, there's LinkedIn platform, there's bloody Voxer. There's just, it seems like everything's got a messaging platform now.
It's true. And in my case, I'm platform agnostic. I just know where my customer communicates. Wherever they communicate, that's where I am. I got one on WhatsApp, a couple on Signal, most predominantly in my app. Some are email only. One of them smoke signal. I'm just kidding, but whatever they use, I'll use. I'm not afraid to be where it's convenient for them. The other thing is when people are ghosting you, the mistake that I've seen people make, and I sort of I help one of my partners with this. He tries to put 2 or 3 points in a response, or makes it too formal or cheesy or corporate-y, and I usually just replace it with like 1 or 2 words and a question mark. If I wanted someone to respond back to me and they haven't responded to my last message, I'd just put their name, question mark. And this is for the very reason that I don't think people are intentionally trying to avoid you. I think they're just as confused and bamboozled and all over the place, just as a regular consumer / business operator. They're time poor, tech overloaded. Let's go easy on them. It's much easier for them to reply to their name and a question mark, and almost like it's unbelievable, the response. 9 out of 10, I think it is. And they're like, oh, sorry, yeah, like I got distracted, or I was waiting on such and such, or yeah, I'm still
in
on it.
most cases, you just need something that's easy to respond on one of these.
It's a nudge without the cheesy just giving you a nudge, or the old classic Facebook poke. So be where the customer is at, and be mindful that they're probably confused too, and don't do the languaging that salespeople use. To do anything but that. Really, send the languaging that a personal friend would use, like the very best copywriters do, conversational.
Yeah, because if you don't, it just reeks of rookie.
It does, yeah.
And if someone's an experienced buyer, which most people are, they probably don't know the things that they should be considering when they make a purchase, but they're used to purchasing, and they can smell that a mile away.
A critical point on that. A lot of buyers think they're great buyers, but if you're a professional seller of something, it's, unless you've just started the job, and it won't be the case for long, you've sold vastly more than that person buys. Example, when I was selling cars, I might sell 185 cars in a year. That person might have purchased 5 or 10 cars in their entire lifetime. Like, I have sold far more cars than they've bought, so I know how it works, and I can help educate them in some of the subtle things they might not be aware of. And you can do it in really tactful ways. Like, that's an interesting question, John, and I can understand why you would ask that based on what exposure you've had to the information you've got. But from what I see and the sort of volume that goes through, I think we're probably looking in a different region when it comes to where that price is going to land. So it's like a soft repositioning of price expectation.
And that's being elegant with language.
It's being elegant. It's not typical, and it's still, I'm trying to help them and give them pride as well without smashing them up too bad. Although my mentor taught me to break their nose, which is something I had to do a lot, not physically, but metaphorically. I had very strong driver type customers who were, very demanding, pushy, aggressive.
A-type personality.
You break their nose, they respect it. Like shut them down, stop them in their tracks, pattern interrupt them. And even though I didn't know it was called a pattern interrupt back then, but it would almost shock them into listening. For once, someone's actually standing up to this bull in the china shop. It's like, sit down and you just behave, and then we'll talk. Last question I have for now, and I feel like we've probably got more episodes out of in the future, because it's such a river of experience for both of us on this topic. And while I say this, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it somewhere and you do have questions we haven't covered and you'd like us to, just send me some suggestions. But I'm seeing a shift, sort of more recently I've seen people talking about setters and closers. I'd love it if you could just go a little bit into that, whether you feel like roles are best split up or incorporated. I mean, back in the day, it was hunters and farmers. And that was really the segmentation, people who go out and get new customers, the business development people. And then there was the farmers who had more of a client nurturing relationship. But now we have setters and closers, which is more likely talking about the hunting side, but they're splitting it into two parts. Like a couple of dogs I used to have. One dog would go and bark when they found a rabbit, and my other dog, the sight hound, would charge the rabbit and grab it. Like, they worked as a team.
Look, it's the biggest thing that I see, because I also, with certain clients, have a recruiting function with them to help them to find great salespeople. And there's a pattern that I'm seeing where, and it's mostly with companies that don't spend money on leads. So they haven't got paid lead gen in place, and their business has grown primarily on repeat business and referrals, and relationships. And then they get to a point where normally it's the business owner that's handling the sales, or like my carpentry client, he even said to me, he goes, I've grown this business to $5 million without having to talk to anyone. This guy was a real introvert, great tradesy.
Was he on the
great,
Sunshine Coast? Because you can't get tradespeople here within a month or two most of the time.
He's in Queensland. He's in Queensland. But we fixed all that for him, and now he's on track to do about bloody 16. But
wow.
Yeah, amazing. And he's he's got a couple of other divisions and 3 different estimators and stuff, and he's on fire. But the the thing that happens is that they don't have paid lead gen, so they don't have a lot of lead flow, and then they think that they can fix this, or they think, okay, well, I want to outsource the sales function now. So what am I going to do? I'm going to hire a salesperson. But they don't get clear, or they lead that person to believe that they are going to be converting qualified prospects into paying clients. And then that person starts and he says, well, where are all the different people that I'm meant to be talking to? And they say, oh well, you've got to go and find those.
Oh.
And so then that person sits down and he starts looking at LinkedIn, and he starts maybe ringing a few past clients. And what he realizes pretty quickly is that the incentive plan that they've put in place is just not even remotely
Well, they've become
achievable.
a marketing department.
Yeah, he's a glorified appointment setter.
Wow.
Even though he's got the title of BDM, he's a glorified appointment setter, and they haven't set him up with a sales process. They haven't inducted him. They haven't given him leads to go and talk to. And so he spent 80% of his time making cold calls, and he'll crash and burn. I've got one client that's had 10 people. And so my conversation with her is, okay, you need to delineate that. Now, having said that, there's about 3% of people that you could hire that would go into that role and they would just make it work.
They'll make anything work.
They'll make anything work, but it's literally 3% of the people. 3 out of every 100 people that you could hire in that role will just get in there and they'll just make it work. But it's a recipe for disaster. I shudder to think how much this woman has wasted having 10 people in that role that have all crashed and burned. None of them have lasted longer than about a year.
When I started that first sales job at BMW, I built a database and sent out physical letters targeting marketing agency directors for BMW. And within a year, 50% of my business was repeat referral. And some months I would sell more than the other 5 or 6 salespeople combined.
Wow.
So it was like I was going to succeed no matter how bad the dealership was at generating leads.
Yeah, well, you're that guy.
I was the guy. I was that guy. And it sounds weird talking about yourself like that, but I brought the receptionist flowers and chocolates occasionally, and she would occasionally route me an extra phone call here and there, which was nice. But I was just working the system the way the system was able to be worked. And then when I went to Mercedes-Benz, that was the big test. Is it me or is it the product? But I was able to replicate it. You touched on a point that's it's an emotional strong point for me. Employers, and remember I'm a partner in a recruitment agency, employers often set up their team members for failure. They don't give them the infrastructure or support they need, and then they blame that person, which is terrible. I created a system that was so effective for hiring and training salespeople at Mercedes-Benz that generated 5 out of the top 6 salespeople when I was a sales manager, that they asked me to train all the other sales managers on what it was that I was doing. Everything from the ad to the induction to the sales training program, which took me about 1 to 2 weeks to train people. I was hiring 4 people at a time. And it's so rare. People don't do it. When someone came to work on their first day, I actually had their pay details so they could get paid. I had their name tag printed in advance. I gave them their notebook, their pen, a work kit, their desk, their phone. It was all there. When I started in sales, it's like just pick a desk over there somewhere. I had nothing. They didn't even tell me how it works to get to drive home in the company car. And I took the last key off the thing and it had a fuel warning light and it was pitch black out the front and no one even orientated me on how the car works. And I had to figure it all out myself. It was like, and then I put fuel in it on the way home and they wouldn't even reimburse me the next day. like it's just welcome to sales, like sink or swim.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when I first got to New South Wales. They gave me a set of car keys, a range, and an account list. It said, "Off you go, Tiger."
That's it. Oh, yeah. No, I was that guy. When I was doing the field work for the repossessions, we used to be allowed 1 week to do a west trip or a south trip, and it was like 1,700 kilometres, and all the reps took a week. One guy, Prem, he took longer than a week. He was still there a week and a half later. I finished it on a Tuesday afternoon. I did the whole trip in 2 days. And the KPI was 3 collections per day, 5 days for the week. It was 15 collections for the week. One day I did like 27 collections in 1 day. It was the most exciting thing. I was switched on. When you find those people, you grab them, give them a stake. The only reason I'm not still in those dealerships is they didn't give me equity. So I was forced to get my own position. So just a quick sort of recap. It sounds like sales has changed a little bit from when I was doing it, but some of the fundamentals haven't. If you can follow up quickly, do proper discovery, be a great listener, connect with humans, especially as more things go artificial. If you actually have good intent to help people be better off, it sounds like you can still succeed in sales, whether that's you as the business owner or you're hiring a sales team. Your thoughts on that, John?
Absolutely. I think you asked me, I think might have even been before press record, if it's gotten harder. I think it has, but I think the opportunity is still just as good as what it always was. You just need to be aware of the changes and the lay of the land and just move accordingly. Change the way that you navigate the landscape accordingly.
And you're fully in tune with this. It's what you do. Can you drop us a mention of where we can find you, ask you if any of those templates you mentioned in the episode? I'm happy for people to
Awesome.
contact
you can find me if you do a Google search for John Blake Sales. The follow-up framework, which is a 15-minute training as well as a PDF guide, is at johnblakeaudio.com. And if you email me, if you just contact me through the website, I'll send you that dirty dozen list of 12 words to avoid in your sales conversations. More than happy. Love it.
Thanks, John Blake. Yeah. And we will we'll see if anyone's got questions. That we might have to have another crack at this. It's opening up some old history. I do occasionally get a podcast listener say they're hearing new stories from me occasionally that they'd never heard before of all the episodes. But topics like this are likely to bring them out.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Well, I appreciate you. We'll put this episode up at 1,120 at jamesschramko.com. Thank you.
Awesome.
This is James Schramko.